Prova. So welcome everybody. Good afternoon. We are just fixing the last technical issue as usual, but as I explained to our distinguished speaker, Professor Aoki, in Italy we have the 15 minutes before each class. So in Japan they haven't, but anyway. Non penso che abbiamo bisogno di altri. Perfetto. Dove ce l'hai, Cavaliere Francesco? I think we may start. Thank you, everybody, for coming today in the frame of this integrated effort among the courses of History of International Organizations, History of Technology, and Philosophy of Law, or history of political doctrines. I'm sorry, I apologize with Francesco and the other colleagues who are participating today. Thank you, students, for coming. I'm particularly proud to have this opportunity to discuss an issue that is not very frequent to have during the ordinary course in the many schools and universities in Italy, exactly related to the question of outer space and of satellites, not from a technological perspective. So we are not talking about engineering, but we will talk about global issues related with maybe the most globalized problem in the international community, and not only. We will have the opportunity to heard and to interact with in a dialogue developed with the participation of Professor Setsuko Aoki of Keio University and long-standing prominent expert for the Japanese government in the committees for everything that is related with the space, and especially with the one with the Committee of the United Nations for the outer space. And Professor Aoki is an international lawyer and taught many years international law in Keio University, as I mentioned, and now she is moving to Chiba Institute of Technology. And the dialogue will be developed with the author of the book that provide to us the flyer, the image of the flyer of this event, Frediano Finucci, who is a prominent journalist in Italy for La Sette TV channel. Maybe most of you have seen Finucci only through the screen, and now you have the possibility to see you directly in person. He authored this very relevant book, I think maybe a unique in the Italian, among the Italian publication, written on the satellites by a broader public perspective, if I may say. And the discussion will be after the presentation of our distinguished speakers, will be opened by Professor Zini, who will break the ice for you. And I hope that you have many questions and comments related to the presentation of our speakers. So I give the floor to Professor Aoki for her presentation. Please, Setsuko. Hai dozo.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. And well, let me sit down here and yeah. Well, for the next 45 minutes, well, I'll talk my version of space security and wealth and well, insecurity. And I read his book, The Great Game of the Satellite, with great enthusiasm. He covered military, civil, and commercial aspects, and it's very intertwined relationships. And I thought it's a keyword was, for me, dual use. So inspired by his book, I made this presentation, but especially in terms of international space law. So this, well, comprises 4 parts. At first, well, the number is very important. So basic space utilization and how many satellites have been launched, or well, how many times the rocket has been launched, and then dual use aspects of space, and well, military aspects, how the law addresses it, and then finally some international cooperation, and it's of course competition and the source of conflict. So at first, so basic space utilization. Well, because of my pronunciation, if you don't understand, please raise your hand. I will try to say, well, the same thing in a different way. The number of the satellite in operation, sorry. Yes, the number of the satellite is now, well, it's functional satellites. The number is increasing very rapidly. I got that number from the open source. And in 2013, well, it's 1167. And January of last year, it's more than 700. And this is from the open source number of satellites of the United States, China, and Russia. Until 2012, the number of Russian satellites is bigger than that of China. But rapidly, China is improving its, well, greatly improving its capabilities. And now there is no comparison. Russia is the distant third space power in the world. And its military satellites. Well, I got that number from open source, but I kind of think Chinese number is, well, lower than it really is. Some satellites owned by People's Liberation Army is categorized in civil space, civil satellites, well, according to this source, well, Union of Concerned Scientists. But, well, it just shows the tendency. USA first, China, and Russia. This also, well, this of course includes dual-use satellite, heavily used for military purposes. And then from here, the number of rockets being launched. Well, how many times, well, one country can launch rocket shows a very important criterion to show the capability. And in 2016, for the first time, China became #1, but mostly before that, either Russia or the USA. And from this year, China shows its, well, strengths, well, really clearly. And the other phenomenon is New Zealand. Well, for the first time, New Zealand launched, well, its rocket, but it's not a New Zealand rocket. It's an American company, Rocket Labs. Rocket Labs made a launching site in New Zealand, and American company made a rocket and satellites. So the first satellite New Zealand got was in 2018, but it's from American company. And until around that time, the launching of rocket had been almost dominated by only several countries: United States, China, Russia, European Space Agency, Japan, and India. But that is becoming changing very rapidly. Next year, again, China #1. And from around that time, India becomes very strong. Well, 2 years consecutively, India's launch number excels Japan, and New Zealand or American company, Rocket Labs. It's very strong. And Iran, sometimes it's very difficult to distinguish if it's missile or rocket, but Iran is becoming strong as well. And then 2020, China becomes #1 in number of launching rocket for the 3 consecutive years. 2021, well, again, 4 consecutive years. Around that time, US policymakers were a bit concerned, started a bit concerned. And in this case, well, the last year, if New Zealand launch number is added to USA's 35, then, well, USA was #1. But 2021, yet China got a strong first position. The reason I put, well, different color on August launch, well, I will explain to you later. Well, it's rather difficult to number how many rockets are launched, well, by which country. Sometimes it's difficult to distinguish between missiles and rockets. And, well, in the case of Russia, well, Soyuz rocket previously used in the French Guiana launching site was added by the Russian launch number. And the European Space Agency, well, counted it in the European launch. So depending on who counts, the number can be a little bit different. Well, my strategy is from which territory the rocket is launched. So while it's American companies launch, it's New Zealand. Then, well, 2022, it's a very bad year for Japan. For the first time in decades, Japan was not be able to successfully launch a rocket, but New Zealand 9 times. And well, even the number is bigger than European Space Agency. And from that year, United States is very, very strong. Well, it's mostly SpaceX. SpaceX launches every week, almost every week, and sometimes twice a day. 2023, yes, that American strength continues. Then last year, it's the number of launch is biggest in history, 275. And among 153 times launch of the United States, kind of 147 or 8 were done by SpaceX. One company, one private company has such a strong power. It's unprecedented in history. And this slide shows the number of space objects in low Earth orbit. Well, altitude is 2,000 kilometers and lower than that. And space object is different from operating satellite. Operating satellite plus space debris. That is a space object. Well, that nomenclature, that name is used in space-related conventions. And in 2007, all of a sudden, space object, the number increases. It's because of the Chinese anti-satellite test. Then 2009, it again increases rapidly. It's because of the first satellite collision between Russian and American satellite collided in February of 2009. Then space debris, well, more than 2,000 space debris were generated, and the number is, well, greater. And from around 2019, because of the mega constellation, well, of satellites, then the number is increasing. And well, this shows concrete number. And because the Soviet Union launched satellites very often, well, much more than the United States. One reason was that the satellite's quality was inferior to those of the United States. The Soviet Union had to launch very often. So, and because of that, until 2018, the number of space objects, including functioning satellites and space debris, Russia was number 1. And then, but Russian space activities was, well, on the decrease for, well, medium and long terms. So since January of 2019, it's changed to United States. Yes, and then, well, green part, it shows if the number of space objects decreases, it means the activity of space activities is on the decrease a little bit. So last year, Russia, India, and Japan's space activity was, well, a bit, it was flat or not, it was not so aggressively improving. The reason United Kingdom's space object is, well, it's on the increase recently is its mega constellation, OneWeb mega constellation satellite. Previously, the United Kingdom didn't have a very strong or very spectacular, well, satellite activities. So I couldn't count the number of their space objects. But from 2022, well, it's it was included in NASA catalogs, and it's easy to count. Then, well, today, UK is one of the countries which has lots of space objects. So this shows two things. So mega constellation, it's game changer. It's for sure. But at the same time, these days, the number of space objects one country has may not be as important as it used to be. Well, one great big satellite is important, but a constellation of satellite, it's, well, one small satellite doesn't mean so much. So now I think we need different criterion to assess the capability of, well, countries. And from here, well, I'd like to talk about same technologies, different purposes, so blurring boundaries between security and business. So first, the destructive ASAT test. Usually it's done by ballistic missiles. And, well, in the 21st century, China, United States, China, United States, India, and Russia did such destructive ASAT test. And even today, the one China did, well, it's causing lots of space debris because it was done in a very high altitude in 865 kilometers. So for ASAT test, it's extraordinary high altitude. So still, it's almost 3,000. And when India made an ASAT test, it was not, well, it was of course criticized, but not as spectacularly criticized as China had been. Well, of course, political reasons are related, but one of the other reasons is, well, less space debris. Until around the summer of, well, 2022, the debris was almost zero in case of Indian ASAT test. So, well, ASAT test is destabilizing, but in terms of space debris, that was not so bad. Well, India made an ASAT test in a really low altitude of about 250 kilometers at the altitude or so. But China was very bitterly criticized about its ASAT test. So since then, China changed its test from destructive one to cyber attack and jamming. And these days, mostly these four countries try to, well, at least these four countries and the other countries might do as well, the attack satellite using space systems. So space-based system satellites or ground stations or communication links, and mostly by cyber attacks. And well, this incident was very well written in this book. And well, so satellites altitude and orbit is maintained by telemetry tracking and command capabilities. And it's done with a communication between the ground and satellite. That was cyber attacked. So for about 12 minutes each, American satellites, Landsat 7 remote sensing satellite, and well, Terra AM1 satellite of NASA, both were temporarily hijacked, and it couldn't maintain orbit very well. And American Congress did research, and it was revealed that it was done from Svalbard ground station. It's kind of cyber attacked. And well, American Congress said it was done by China. China was silent about this. And these are types of Chinese non-destructive ASAT tests. And one type is missile defense type. And it doesn't kill satellites, but it just put target, and from to target point, missile will be launched. So nothing will be destroyed, but it's assessed as ASAT test or rendezvous and proximity operation type. It's well, another one spacecraft approaches the other one and retrieves the satellite by robotic arms or bumped in and to change the orbit, or well, approaching, and then from here laser weapon or some other weapons are released, or directed energy from the ground. These three types are very, and in addition to that, cyber attack are done by China. And I wouldn't go into the detail. These are examples, and well, some of them are also in this book. Yes, and now the United States intelligence community evaluates that, well, that China has sufficient capability to destroy most of the LEO satellites, but not certainly destroy satellites located in geostationary orbit or medium, well, Earth orbit. But the capability is improving very rapidly. And this is a Russian non-destructive ASAT test type since 2014. And for instance, one satellite is launched. And then, well, again, well, this incident is very vividly, very well written in this book. One parent satellite is launched. And then from that satellite, its Matryoshka doll, another satellite, is released. And then, well, both of the parent satellite and child satellite stalking, well, sometimes US important intelligence satellite. Well, in this case, when Cosmos 2542 is stalking USA 245, it approaches, it's orbiting in the same, well, it's navigating in the same orbit for several months and gets information of USA 245 and to prepare for, well, attack if it's need be. And then, well, from time to time, well, it's test to stalking to its own satellite. And, well, like in the case of Cosmos 2543, it was released from the child satellite. It's so grandchild satellite. And then again, well, it's test to, well, other satellite. So this kind of Matryoshka doll type ASAT tests were very often done by Russia. And new Chinese military test, that was the one I put a different color for the launch of rocket in 2021. Well, in August 2021, well, China was successful in launching in fractional orbital bombardment system. It doesn't, well, it's in the orbit, but it doesn't make an entire rotation of an Earth orbit and then coming back to Earth. And this case with an hypersonic glide vehicle was on the missile. And then before making the entire rotation, it came back to China. That Phobos, fractional orbital bombardment system, was being made in the Soviet Union in 1960s and 70s, but it was not successful. And later, by the arms control agreement between Soviet Union and the USA, that was forbidden. Then, well, forbidden. Then, well, China succeeded in it. And this Phobos is not prohibited by international law. Well, United Nations made 5 treaties on outer space since 1967. Most important is the Outer Space Treaty. And Article 4 of the Outer Space Treaty provides, well, permissible scope of military use of outer space. On the celestial bodies, well, almost demilitarization is successful. It's like the Antarctica. But in outer void space, only circling around the Earth and otherwise station weapons of mass destruction is prohibited. So if it doesn't make an entire rotation, it's legal. And also ICBMs from one point of the ground to other point, it's legal. So that is a situation. And then, well, rendezvous and proximity operation. This is useful for commercial purposes and also military purposes. RPO already done well for ASAT test, but this is also for mitigating space debris issues. Now, well, space debris, we already witnessed that rapid increase of space object, and among which about 90% are space debris. But to mitigate it, well, for instance, for private space space stations, this is to be made in early 2030s. Well, gas station for satellite would be made, and then it's refuel and repair. So one satellite to go other one, and also debris removal device to actively remove the space debris, to go to space debris and then catch it, or to kill it by laser. So same technology for ASAT, but the purpose is different. That is a very difficult and enchanting thing about space activities. Same technologies are useful for, well, civil use, commercial use, and at the same time, it's weapons. And this business already started in 2020. And well, the first successful one was done in 2020. And then now second generation on-orbit servicing is being tested. So for instance, at first, mission robotic vehicle, big satellites, in which refueling pad are put in the orbit. And then from time to time, when it's the customer needs, robotic arm of this, well, MRV gives one mission extension pods are given to customer's satellite. And later, that customer's, well, MEP, mission extension vehicle itself is launched from the ground and then goes to MRV, that robotic, well, it's mission robotic vehicle. That lifespan is about 10 years. Then from there, when it's asked, robotic arm gives fuel to that target satellite. So, well, in a word, RPO, that could be an ASAT, and also its on-orbit servicing, very useful activities. So how to distinguish it legally, and how to ban ASAT and to, well, allow OOS, that is very difficult today. And in terms of international law today, we are just searching for that. But as a first step, where is in outer space, where such an orbits are navigating, to know that is with the first step. And now, space situational awareness and space domain awareness are thought as first step. And well, United States, China, European Space Agency, EU, and other countries are taking care of at least space situational awareness to identify what objects are flying where. at one moment, and more progressively to identify capabilities and the purposes of a space object. Then, well, you may or you may not, but you might be able to distinguish between ASAT device and useful on-orbit servicing device. We don't know what are being done in outer space. So as a first step to know where, what exists and for what purposes, with what capabilities, it's not an easy thing. And it's done by, well, tracking radars, optical telescopes, and also satellites, SDA satellites. And to get information about SSA, the best one is in the hand of the United States Spacecom. And private companies and governments, well, even American state or American local governments have to have service and information, its needs agreements with Secretary of Defense, SSA agreement. And well, the homepage of Spacecom says, in April last year, at least 185 agreements are done. So with the agreements, oh, oh, I see.
No worries, because the presentation of Professor Aoki will be uploaded on the website of the department. So also the ones who's following from remote could see the whole presentation of Professor Aoki. And I say it's the opportunity to welcome Professor Andrea Francioni, who joined us in the, you, in the audience.
Oh, it's okay. Yes, thank you very much. Well, my presentation will be distributed, and if you have any questions, well, the first page is, well, my e-address is put, so, well, write me questions. I will answer them as soon as possible after 13th of April, when well, I'll be back to Japan, my home. Yeah, this is very technical, so, well, you need a presentation.
And I apologize again with Professor Aoki Sumimasen.
Raise your hand. It's not Italian. Where are you from? France, Slovakia, Turkey, Turkey.
We have a big Turkish delegation in my class, so I'm particularly proud of. Portugal, yeah, and also.
Yes, I'm Italian.
And se non ci possiamo fare quella, giusto? Finestra. Finestra. Proviamo. Ok. Sì, sì, ok. Here we go. I think. And if not, again, you will find the whole presentation on the website of the department, on the platform, and on all the fantastic instruments provided us by our university. Okay. Okay, it's fine. Okay. Niente? Non importa. Okay. We apologize with, okay? Okay, now it's working. Thank you. Thank you. Grazie. And, okay, okay. And thank you again, Professor Aoki, for her kind understanding. We are, yeah, please take the time.
So sorry. So let's restart it. Yeah. Well, we can't have a presentation mode at this moment, but I hope it's all right. Well, your eyes are young, so you can see small things. And well, from the standpoint of international law, there is no rule. Well, how near you can go to other satellites? No explicit rules. There are efforts done to make it like in the name of keep out zones or safety zone, but it's just proposals and nothing was decided. Conference on Disarmament is an international organization stationed in Geneva and made in 1978. But there today, 65 states and consensus is needed to go to do anything. So it's just proposals. So, and the Outer Space Treaty has some vague rules, but it's too vague to effectively implement how to, well, not to cross to other satellites. This is an issue to solve yesterday. And from here, it's satellite technologies used to wage a silent war and real war, and how international law is working. It's a little bit. It's, well, multilateral treaties and US, USSR, Russia bilateral treaties. And today, I will just focus on, well, because of the time, just focus on bilateral treaties. It's, well, those, on the slide, those are strategic nuclear arms control agreements, but it's working for space security as well. Well, for instance, all these agreements from ABM, Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, to now it's, well, it's suspended, but still working new start until 2026, well, February of 2026, it's new start. There are always provisions for national technical means of verification. That, well, satellite monitoring is the main part of national technical means of verification. And these bilateral agreements says it's doing NTM, it's permissible. And you cannot interfere with other parties' national technical means. So it means, well, you cannot do ASAT activities to other satellites as long as it's monitoring if, well, this treaty is being observed or not. More or less, this worked. And then, war in Ukraine. So sorry, in Japanese it's Ukraine, but it's Ukraine in English, I think. Well, already from 1991 Gulf War, it was called as the first space war. Space technologies was very, well, was used. But at that time, for Gulf War, it's the first time that space technology was really participating in the combat itself. And then in war in Ukraine, well, lot of satellites technologies, especially commercial satellite technologies were used to wage a war. And this shows the number of satellites Russia and Ukraine had when the war started. That parts, it's very, very different. Russia has 167 satellites in all, and just military satellites, 69 at that time. But Ukraine, just one nano satellite owned by university. Yet, because of the help of, well, Starlink satellite of SpaceX or Canadian or Finland satellite, remote sensing satellite, all-weather synthetic aperture radar satellite, well, it's Ukraine was able to fight with Russia, well, if it's not full to some extent. But the problem is, so in this case, that private company's satellite would become military objectives. In accordance with the interpretation of the additional protocol 1 to Geneva Conventions, for instance, well, if it's used for combat, well, it could be or it would be such dual-use satellite would be military objectives. And today, well, for an object to be protected as a civilian object, well, the civilian object has to be distinguished from military objectives. But the tendency is hosted payload. For instance, for, well, in real world, for Norwegian satellite, US military sensor is on. And for Japan's navigation satellite, United States SSS sensor is on. That was just launched last February. So it's in space activities, distinction is almost impossible as of today. So commercial satellites could be military objectives, the target of attack very easily. And other problem is, well, if by use of Finland, Finns, Canadian or US companies' satellite means it's a violation of these countries of neutrality law. The answer is very difficult. For one reason is, well, there are two particularly important conventions for neutrality, but it was made in 1907, and it's before the United Nations. United Nations collective security is an important thing, and we don't know to what extent neutrality law is functioned today, and other, well, complicated space law matters. So the answer is not so easy, but mostly European international lawyer says, well, the United States, Finland, Canada, must have broken neutrality law. And the US lawyers kind of says no, because US has, well, long apply qualified neutrality law system. It means if one belligerent is a bad guy, then helping the victim is not the violation of neutrality law. That is a contemporary US interpretation. So the answer is very difficult, but well, I personally think it's the violation of neutrality law. So the last part, cooperation. United Nations endeavored a lot of cooperations, and you may not have known APSCO. So let me focus on this. Asia Pacific Space Cooperation Organization, that was modeled by ESA, well, at least according to China. It was made, well, in 2008, headquartered in Beijing, and it's very active. And it's an observer of, well, observer status was obtained in 2013, and APSCO hold a lot of workshop symposia with United Nations, and it's, well, rather strong today. And APSCO has its own SSA project, and well, it may be speculated that it's used for Chinese military purposes. Then, well, China also has a regional center for space science and technology education in Asia and the Pacific. That was in, well, in the UN system, but, well, its homepage says member states, and interestingly, well, more member states are from South American countries, Latin American countries, and Africa than Asia itself. It's also used for Belt and Road of Chinese kind of international cooperation system, APSCO, UN Science Center, and other Belt and Road Aerospace Innovation Alliance. And, well, other one, it's, well, United States and Soviet Union were, in a way, well, in cooperation since 1962. It's a scientific cooperation, and their framework agreement was developed into today's International Space Station Agreement. And in 2020, it's a new Artemis Accords to develop lunar. It's, well, moon agree. It's in 2020. It's Artemis Accord. It's for the NASA-led Artemis Accord. And today, 53 states are members. And the other one is International Lunar Research Station, led by Russia and China, mostly China. And it's divided. So on the moon, if some activities are, well, progressed, of course it will be progressed, two regimes might exist. And that is not good for universal rules for international law. And last one, it's Russia-China Arms Control Agreement proposal. And UK-led, well, responsible behavior proposal. It's really different one. And the UK, US, and European countries, Japan, support non-legally binding resolutions or, well, code of conduct to more transparent space for peaceful uses of outer space. And Russia and China want to have solid agreement. Well, if, well, you question me later, I will answer what are the differences. But it's less the contents than the attitude, than the, well, political attitude. If we have peaceful relations, I think we could have both responsible behaviors, guidelines, and PPWT treaties, but now the political situation doesn't allow it. So we have to think about how space could be used more for more peaceful purposes. It's not easy, but well, I hope just raising awareness would be the first step. Thank you very much for your patience and the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aoki Sensei, for her outstanding presentation. And I will give the floor immediately to Dr. Finucci for his presentation and the presentation of his book, actually. Please, Frediano, the floor is yours. If you want, the other microphone is working, so. And Milena would assist you for the presentation of the slides. Ah, okay.
Can you hear me? I have quite a loud voice, so. Okay. Aspetta. Mi metti presentazione? Ah, okay. So, first of all, I'd like to thank Professor Gerlini for inviting me today. I'm very happy to be in your university. I'm very happy to be with you. I'm not a scientist. I'm not an investigator. I'm not an IT man. I have a degree in international relations at the Faculty of Political Sciences in Florence, so more or less like you, okay? So you may wonder why this guy is coming here to talk about satellites. The answer is quite simple. I'd like to say that it's one of the positive consequences of the pandemic of COVID. As you know very well, in Italy we had the first lockdown, at least in Europe. And so during the lockdown, anyone had the possibility, had more time, more free time to do whatever he or she wanted. And somebody was making bread, other pies, and so on. And I decided to study again a subject I was passionate for when I was at the college, unfortunately, last century, and it was astronomy, okay? When I was 18, there was no internet. I had no possibility to access to sources in English. And so I started reading about astronomy during the lockdown, and that's when I discovered the world of satellites. And I said, wow, that's an incredible word. As a journalist, I must know more about that. And so I decided to follow some online courses. There are free courses made by the European Commission. There is a small university in Estonia called the Geo University. It's 150 euro, no expensive. Because this issue, satellite issue, is really new. There are no books. And the technical issues are evolving each month, okay? So there's no time to publish book. You can find everything on the web. So the more I studied this issue, the more I was interested in discovering more. And then in 2022, we had the war in Ukraine. And as the chief of the foreign desk of MyTV, I was in charge of preparing daily news programs. The first week, I anchored for three hours. Then my chief editor, Mr. Enrico Mentana, followed me for other 3 hours. And we went on for 100 days, 100 long days covering every day, the war in Ukraine. And with the study I had on satellite, I discovered how satellites were used in the war in Ukraine. Because I was in some LinkedIn loop, in some chats, technical chats. We are talking about very complicated issue, okay? But I will try to make it very simple. So if I won't be enough clear, please raise your hand and tell me. So that's why I wrote this book. First, it was published in Italian 2.5 years ago, Operazione Satellite. Then it was translated in English, and then it's on printing in French. And the following month, it will be sold in French. So I will start from the scratch, okay? Start from the scratch. This means that the first satellite, as you know, was launched in 1957. It was the Sputnik. It was a shocking moment for the United States because the then Russians managed to send, for the first time, a satellite on Earth. And the second nation that sent a satellite was United States, of course. And does anybody can tell me which was the third nation to send a satellite in orbit? Italy, okay, with a project called San Marco. It was a platform very close to Kenya. The engineer, the name of the engineer was a guy named Broglio, and they used an American rocket, but the satellite was entirely made in Italy. And it is possible to see a mock-up of these satellites if you go to the aerospace section of La Sapienza University in Rome, in the Salaria. So this was the situation in 1957, and that's the situation today. The situation today, no, aspetta un attimo, perché io ho delle animazioni e se non mettiamo la presentazione le animazioni non vanno. Okay, okay. This is the actual situation. Okay, so the world is completely covered by a spider network of satellites. Okay, there are thousands and thousands of satellites. Each month, as our Japanese friend said, each month the number of satellites is increasing. Okay, so where are these satellites? These satellites are in three places, basically. Okay, I will take it very simple. Some satellites are at 36,000 kilometers from the Earth, which is called the geosynchronous orbit. What does it mean? This means that the satellites rotate at the same speed of the Earth. So they remain in the same position, and the satellites watch the same pictures, the same continent. This is the case, for example, of the meteorological satellites, of course. And there are more or less 600, let's say 600 satellites. Those satellites are quite big, are complicated. And then we have the medium Earth orbit. They rely from 50,000 to 20,000 kilometers from the Earth. And what does it mean, medium Earth? It means that they bypass twice a day the same spot, okay? There are more or less 150. And then there are the more interesting, the Lee Earth orbit. Just to be clear, Starlink is here. Okay, Starlink is here. There are more or less 7,000 satellites today. These are the various constellations, Starlink, and the new constellation of Jeff Bezos' Kuiper will be here. And at this altitude, more or less 600 kilometers, there is the International Space Station. What does it mean? It means that if somebody sends some satellites here and creates the debris that our friends were talking about, those debris will be very dangerous for the International Space Station. And we will see later. So how big are satellites? Satellites can be so big as a coach, for example, the old meteorological satellites, but usually are big as a panda, as a car. Or they can so big as a desk. For example, Starlink satellites are so big as a desk. They can be so big as a shoebox. And then we have the nanosatellites. The nanosatellites is a cube that can be held on your hand. They are quite effective. And of course, the smaller they are, the more satellites you can place in orbit. Of course, this is quite normal. This is Starlink. Of course, the satellites needs power, and the power is provided by the solar panels. And once the solar panels are deployed, you can see how high a satellite can be. So what are really satellites for? What can really satellites can do? First of all, they can be used for telecommunication and the internet. It's, you know, everyone knows that to transmit radio, TV, internet, we use satellites. They can be used for meteorology. Again, you know, weather forecast. Every time that there is somebody talking about the weather, they show you satellites charts. Okay, so it's crystal clear. And then there are less known use. The first one is to measure the age of the objects. What does it mean? This means, for example, that a satellite using the sensors can detect if a bridge or a skyscraper is moving. Of course, is a skyscraper is moving too much or is lowering down, it's something quite dangerous, okay? So it can detect such dangers. Then there is a very interesting aspect of satellites, to track ships. This function is called maritime tracking. What does it mean? I don't know if some of you is confident with boats, but every ship has an electronic equipment which is called AIS. The AIS is a box that sends a signal with the name and the code of the ship. So every ship can be detected by others, okay? On the radar, you see the ship, and you see that the ship is called Donald Duck or Mickey Mouse, and it's a bull carrier or something like that. But maybe from time to time, there are ships that switch off the AIS, and these ships become ghost ships, which are very dangerous, okay? Because 100% and 99%, they are doing something illegal. For example, they are smuggling weapons, they are smuggling oil, like Russia, for example, has a fleet of oil tankers. And despite this electronic equipment, the AIS is switched off, with some satellites, you can track the ships, okay? For example, the European Union has a constellation of satellites called Copernicus, which is used also for meteorological purposes. But one of these satellites, the satellites are called Sentinels. One of the Sentinel satellites is dedicated to maritime tracking because they try and track the boats of migrants coming, for example, from Libya or from Greece, from Turkey, from Northern Africa. Then there are other functions very important. For example, to detect pollution. They can detect if a city or an area is polluted, or even if a sea is polluted, okay? They can detect even the temperature of the sea. Then there is another function quite interesting, is to measure the thickness of the ice, which is very important, for example, for all those ships who navigate in the Baltic Sea. Because, of course, if the ice is quite thick, this means that the ships has to use more engine, and so they use more fuel. So, for example, boats in the Baltic Sea or also in the Arctic Sea, they receive twice a day a chart, and so they can see where exactly the ice is thin, and they can navigate where the ice is thin in order to save fuel. Okay, this is something not useful for Mediterranean captains, but in very cold places, it is very useful. And then there is something that is quite unknown, the spectrometer. What is a spectrometer? The spectrometer is a tool that is built inside the satellite. Basically, every time that the sun enlightens something, an object, for example, a table or a car or anything else, this object reflects the light, okay? And the spectrometer can analyze the light reflected and can detect what an object is made of. For example, if a satellite bypass, I don't know, a field, it can detect if the field is made of crop, is made of coffee, is made of wood, is made of, for example, tarmac, and which is very important. The more bands the spectrometer has in a satellite, the more objects it can understand, it can detect. Okay, so it's useful to explain how important is, for example, to detect if a house is made of wood or is made of bricks. For example, there are some insurances in Northern Europe that before agreeing for an insurance of a house, they can detect if the house is made of wood, if there is a forest surrounded by. For example, if there is a forest, there may be more likely a fire, so the price of the insurance is higher. But let's go ahead. Another aspect of the spectrometer is to detect the presence of the chlorophyll. Probably you know the chlorophyll is the vital liquid inside the plants, okay, inside the flowers. And the satellites can detect, and this is extraordinary, if a leaf is dead, if it's stressed, or if it's in a healthy conditions. What does it mean? This means that if Frediano, if I have a plantation in Brazil, I don't need to go there to check if the coffee plants or the cocoa plants are in a good health. I can use a satellite, okay, without going there, or maybe I have farmers there. But if I want double check if a plantation is in good conditions, I can use the satellite. And with the kind of fantasy, it is possible to use this tool in a very fantastic way. For example, to detect the leaks in the pipelines. This is a pipeline. If there is a leak in the pipeline of water, the water is released and the vegetation above the wicks will be in better condition. And so there are satellites that can identify among the pipelines if there is a leak in a pipeline without sending humans just to control. So let's go to the most sexy aspects of the satellites, the pictures. As you know very well, in the past and today as well, there are spy satellites that can make pictures of everywhere in the world. I'll give you some examples. During the COVID, there was about skepticism about the number of the people affected by pandemic in China. You know, in Western countries, we did not trust China figures, okay? So there were some American satellites. They decided to identify the crematoriums, and they discovered that in the crematoriums were created parking lots, new parking lots. So the more cars were in these new parking lots, the more people were burying inside the crematorium, okay? So this is intelligence. But the very interesting thing is that this intelligence was made with commercial satellites, not with military satellites, okay? It was one of the first time in the history that commercial satellites were used also by newspaper to gather news. Another interesting story, of course, is the war in Ukraine. As you remember, Russia started gathering thousands of soldiers in the border between Crimea, Russia, and Ukraine at the end of 2021. So the Americans and the British gave an alert and they said, wow, guys, the Russians are preparing for an invasion over there. And the Russians said, no, we are just, it's just an exercise. It's a drill, okay? We are just, you know, making exercise. Then President Joe Biden at that time, if you read the book written by Bob Woodward, you will understand very well. President Joe Biden asked an American company, which is Maxar again, to make pictures of the Russian troops at the borders with Ukraine. And what they discover what they called an unusual number of military hospital tents. What does it mean? That usually when the Russians make an exercise, they place, let's say, 3 tents for 3,000 soldiers, okay? But here, the number of tents was much higher. And this means that it was not an exercise. They were preparing to invade, and they were preparing to receive many, many, many wounded soldiers, okay? So this was the proof that Putin was lying. I told you about the ghost ships. The use of satellites to detect ghost ships is quite popular among investigative journalists. For example, Christian Triebert is a journalist from, let me say, I don't know if it's from Bellingcat or not. Anyway, this investigation journalist was able, using Sentinel satellites, when we are talking about open sources, you don't have to pay. These are paid by the European Union. He was using this satellite to track the Moscow dark fleet of Russian oil. So again, for the first time, it was possible for a journalist to use commercial services, or at least institutional services, which are for free, to gather news, to discover news. I tell you another quite tricky and interesting story. Maybe some of you have heard about the story of the plane who disappeared in Malaysia. Any of you? Raise your hands. Just 1, 2. Okay, 3. Great. So what happened? In March 2014, a plane landed who took off from Kuala Lumpur and directed to Beijing, suddenly disappeared from the radar, okay? Just to make a long story short, probably the pilot suicided, probably, okay? But the fact is that the plane has never been found, okay? So this plane disappeared. There's nobody found debris, wreck, lifeboats or bags or seats or that kind of stuff. Just the plane disappeared. And moreover, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, they are not very rich countries. So they do not have, you know, powerful navies just to make research and so on. So what happened? A private American company, which is, I don't remember if it was Maxar or Planet, one of those. They have a community of guys, okay, who are called Tomnoder. Tomnod is a Mongolian name that means big eye, okay? And those crazy men or women or teenager are called the Tomnoder. So this satellite provider decided to switch one of their satellites to the Indian Ocean and to make thousands of pictures of the sea. Okay, they divided these thousands of pictures and they sent to 2.3 million of people. So people were looking, searching for debris, wings, bags, life vests, whatever happens when a plane crashes. And this story, if you have Netflix, is described in this series, which is called MH370, the plane that disappeared. There was a lady, and she said that she recognized life vests and parts of the airplane. At the present stage, as far as I know, nobody has found anything. But what was interesting for me was this big treasure hunt, okay, using satellite tools for a humanitarian purpose. Today, this job to make picture and to distribute to 2.3 million people is useless. Why, in your opinion? Because we have artificial intelligence. And so artificial intelligence can do the same job. If you have a picture of a bag or of a life vest just floating on the sea, you just put this picture in a program and you ask the program to scan all the pictures. Okay, so this is the difference. But what's happening today with satellites? We are in a very, very, very interesting period because we are living in what the historian of technology call iPhone momentum of satellites. In 2007, Steve Jobs showed to the world the iPhone. The iPhone was an extraordinary tool because for the first time we had a mobile phone, which was at the same time a computer, a device to connect with the internet. But for the first time, Steve Jobs opened to the world a new market. It was the market of the application, okay? So many people, many firms, many enterprises decided to do business in application. And this is called iPhone momentum. So where a new technology is available to the wide population at a low cost. And the same phenomenon we can detect with this guy, Elon Musk. Because Elon Musk invented something which is called the Ryan Aerospace. You know, with Ryanair, for the first time in the history of aviation, it was possible to fly, to buy a ticket for more or less than 20 euro, 30 euro, okay? So it was a democratization of airline. And the same thing happened with Elon Musk, because for the first time in the history of space, Elon Musk was able to build rockets and to send into orbits satellites, for example, at a very, very low price. Do you know how much it cost to send a shoebox to the International Space Station for an experiment, of course? With Elon Musk rockets, just give me a price. How much is to send $2,000? Who's offering more? Okay, it's my Israeli friend is optimistic. Is it 7,000 euro? Okay.
But still not so much.
Okay, 7,000 with 7,000 euro, you can send a shoebox to SpaceX. Of course, they detect, they want to know what's inside. It's not, of course, explosive and so on. And with 7,000 euro, they carry this shoebox to International Space Station for an experiment, and they can take it back. Okay, so you can imagine how many companies with Elon Musk have decided to use its low-price rockets. And this is not only a democratization of space industry, but also a democratization of the so-called OSINT. The OSINT is the intelligence of the poor. Once upon a time, it was the intelligence of the poor. But with all those services, Maxar Technologies, Planet Technologies, it is possible for normal researchers, for me, for you, for anybody, to have satellite pictures at a very low price. I will show you later. So these are, as our Japanese friend said, to build a satellite, it's not an easy task, but it's possible, okay? Satellites cost more or less 1 million euro. And every country can make a satellite. But to take into orbit, it's another book. It's quite difficult. We need rockets. We need powerful rockets. And then, you know, Americans say, when they say something difficult, they say it's rocket science. Because rocket science is really, really complicated. And here we have, my God, here we have nothing. Okay. Here we have all the different rockets. Rockets from India, rockets from US, rockets from China. We have an Italian rocket, which is built very close to Rome. It's called Vega. For those of you who have been in Milano, in the Science Museum close to Sant'Ambrogio, there is a mock-up of the Vega rocket just in the center of Milan. New Zealand. And this is the rocket of Elon Musk, which is really inexpensive, okay? But there are, as our Japanese friends told us, other ways to send rockets, because the technology is the same of the ballistic missiles. The ballistic missiles are those with explosives. You have only to change the top of the missiles. You keep off the explosive, you put inside the payload as satellites. And that's what, for example, Israel do. Israel use ballistic missiles, and from time to time they launch and they cross the Mediterranean Sea, which is quite dangerous, and they cross Portugal, by the way. And Israel, but also Pakistan, also other countries, they use military missiles to send into orbit their rockets. Sorry, I did something quite warm. So I said that you can find easily satellites data at a very low price. For example, where is it possible to find satellites data? There are many companies. Planetech is an Italian one, Maxar, Sentinel. Many of these companies gather all those data on a platform, on an Amazon platform, which is called Amazon Web Service. Personally, I have a subscription with this device. It's called Up42, and the price of this platform is 300 euro. With 300 euro, you can buy satellite pictures, and each time you download satellite picture, the credit decrease. You know, it's normal. The more detailed the pictures are, the more expensive are, but you know, 300 euro for satellite pictures without delay. You just Google, you sign in, you pay with your credit card, and you can immediately download satellite data, which is something, in my view, which is something really amazing. But let's go to another topic. One of the most popular aspects of satellites is the GPS. Does anybody knows what GPS is? Raise your hands, please. 1, 2, 3, okay. GPS is an American constellation of satellites, okay? Made of 24 satellites, even if today they are 31, if I'm not wrong. It was invented by the Americans in 1979, and it is something, it was really a revolution for navigation. Basically, each of the 24 satellites has inside the satellite an atomic watch. And this atomic watch sends a signal. Each time that a device, for example, an iPhone, receives the signal from 3 satellites, it can detect not only the exact time, but also the position and at which height you are, if you are, you know, in mountains or if you are at the level of the sea. And this function is fundamental because that's how, for example, you Google and you find where a restaurant is. That's how you understand if your train is late. That's how, for example, you understand if it's possible to rent a car with a car sharing platform. it's used almost everywhere and in every moment, okay? This technology is so popular and is so fundamental for military reasons that other states decided to build their own GPS system. For example, this is the Russian GLONASS. It's the same as the GPS, less sophisticated, let's say, less sophisticated, but it's made of 24 satellites. Then there is the Chinese navigation system Baidu. And then there is the European system, which is only civilian, okay, not military, civilian. It's called Galileo, which is very up to date, but it is not yet completed, okay? By the way, if you have a Samsung or an iPhone, if you check properly, you can switch from GPS to GLONASS, so you are directly connected to the Russians, or you can connect it to the Baidu or to Galileo, okay? The most used for commercial use is GPS, okay? Why I told you about GPS? Because GPS is used today also to drive drones, military drones, okay? So by air, but also by sea. And that's why it is very important to understand where in the world the GPS signal is disturbed, okay? The act of disturbing the GPS is called jamming, okay, jamming. There is a website called www.gpsjam.org. You can easily access every time, that shows you exactly in which part of the world there is a disturbing of GPS. For example, this is Moscow. Of course, Moscow, there is a high level of jamming activity because there is Putin, the Kremlin, and so on, so on, so on. So there are many tools that disturb the signal. This is Poland. Okay, why there are so many jamming activities? Because here we have the facilities for the Ukrainians. It means weapons, soldiers, and so on. Here we are in the Baltic, okay? If I'm not wrong, this is Kaliningrad, the Russian enclave. Or up there, this is a Russian submarine base. So it is very important to know where there is GPS jamming. Why? Because if you fly over with an airplane over an area with a GPS jamming activity, the pilot will have many problems. And this is an easy activity. That's why, for example, North Korea very frequently uses GPS jamming against South Korea, disturbing the fishing vessels and airplanes as well. Okay, and we go directly to the war in Ukraine. Okay, do you know the story of Starlink, of the Ukraine who used Starlink? Is anybody aware of that? More or less, raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, okay. Let's go from the scratch. What happened, basically? The 24th of February, you know, it's the day of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, okay? But in the night, an hour before that the tanks switched their engine off, okay, they received the order to cross the border between Russia and Ukraine. There was a Russian attack against a satellite system called KASAT. What is KASAT? KASAT is a commercial service on an American satellite, and the provider of the service was Italian, by the way. So the Russians made an attack and they destroyed, I mean, with the hacking, the routers. You know the routers, anyone in our home has a router to connect the Wi-Fi, which is the heart of the question. The heart of the question is that Ukraine had no military satellites. For example, in Italy, we have some military satellites in co-sharing with France. And so we don't have this problem because those satellites are quite safe. But the Ukraine had their own military satellites, and so they decided to go to market and to rent a commercial service. The Russians know that, and they attacked this service. And in those nights, we had disruption of internet in Poland, France, Italy, Hungary, and Germany. In Germany, there was an energy provider called Enercon, which lost the control of 500 wind turbines for many days. So they were unable to control their activity. There was so many confusion in those days, so nobody cared about that. But many companies had problems because of the Russian hacking. 2 days later, a man very close to Zelensky called Mikhailo Fedorov made a post on Twitter. At that time, it was again Twitter, not X. And he said, "Dear Elon Musk, while you try to colonize Mars with your rocket, the Russians are destroying our nation. Please give us Starlink connection with the internet." Okay? And the day after, Elon Musk replied, "Dear Mikhailo, now Starlink is available in your country." And the 28th of February, so 2 days after the request, Mr. Fedorov posted a picture of dishes in a military truck arrived in Kiev. Okay? And so the actual number of Starlink dishes arrived in Ukraine was 25,300. Now I make you a question. Dear friends, do you think it's possible to send a military truck stuffed with electronic equipment in 24 hours and in a war zone under Russian shelling after a request made by a post on Twitter? Do you think it's possible?
Intelligence-wise, practically not.
So what's the answer?
So I think that obviously since this was material practically coming from the United States, Russia couldn't touch it as it could touch, for example, Ukrainian stuff. Because I am sure that the Russian intelligence knew about this stuff.
So basically you answer it. Elon Musk was well aware that the Ukrainians were going to ask for Starlink. But not only Elon Musk was aware, but as he said, the Russians were aware of that. And I tell you a story that I tell in my book. At the end of 2021, the Russians sent a ballistic missile and they destroyed one of their satellites, the big satellites. And this operation created something like 3,000 debris, okay? And with those 3,000 debris, disturbed the signal of Starlink. The engineers of Starlink said we were disturbed by this activity. Moreover, they were obliged, the engineers of Starlink, to switch on the engines of the satellites to go to a higher orbit. And the more propellant you use, the shorter is the life of your satellite. So some analysts said that this was the first hostility act of Russia against Ukraine. Okay, we had the invasion, no doubt. The 20 February of 2024. But, sorry, it was, okay, it was 2022, not 2024, it's a mistake. But 6 months before, we had this operation. And so the Russians wanted to disturb Starlink, the historians say. So is this the first time that there was a clash between Americans and Russian in the space? My theory is that no, it's not the first time. I'll tell you this story. The 1st of April of 2014, at 10:30 p.m. Moscow time, there is a blackout of the GLONASS, okay? So all the 24 satellites of the GLONASS of the Russian constellation went down. So let's imagine what could happen if the GPS goes down, okay? If the GPS goes down, means that we do not have phone connection. We do not have the GPS on the boats, on the plane. There are many factories that are using the GPS to have the exact time, so to synchronize the activity. It's a mess, okay? So it's the first time in history that the global positioning system goes down. Again, after 13 hours, the service is again active, but 8 days after, 1/3 of the constellation goes down again. And the Russians gave no explanation. They said nothing. Only 20 days later, the chief of the space agent of the Russian Space Agency in a press conference said it was a simple mathematical error, so it was not worrying. They said, okay, everything is okay, more or less, because you can imagine. So my theory is that this was not an error, but this was an attack. Okay, why I say that? Because as I told you, during my studies, I was in a loop of some analysts on LinkedIn, okay? And I found a study for a guy called Paul Szymanski, which is an analyst, a retired analyst of the US Air Force. And 2 months after the blackout, he published a very complicated paper, really a very complicated paper on LinkedIn. But the outcome of the paper was, I mean, astonishing. Because he realized, calculating when each satellite went down, that the black down was not at the same time, okay? So each satellite switched off in a numerical order. First the satellite number 1, then the number 2, then the number 3, like if somebody was acting on a checklist basis, okay? So it was impossible, in his opinion, a software blackout, because a software blackout creates, as I say, a whole blackout, but not one after the others. So what I did, I called Mr. Szymanski. First of all, I tried to obtain some information about him, just to understand if he was reliable or not. And I said that he has worked for the US Air Forces, for the Pentagon. Now he's retired, so he can speak more freely. And I analyzed some of his papers, and in his papers, he anticipated some events years before. So I considered him reliable. I called him, I made an interview, and he told me another story, which is more sexy. He told me that when each satellite switched off, it was...
It's also important to say, like within the context, it happens only a few weeks after the annexation of Crimea.
You have the point. Oh, it's next slide. Okay. Great. So he said that the only windows, the only place with the visibility when each satellite switched off was a venue in Australia called Alice Springs. In Alice Springs, there is a base called Pine Gap. Probably some of you have seen on Netflix the story of Pine Gap. Pine Gap is a spy base of the so-called Five Eyes. The Five Eyes is the alliance of the 5 intelligence of United States, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and Great Britain, okay? So it's a base of spies. And he told me, Frediano, each time that the satellites fly by this base, it's a switch off. And the first satellite switched off at 6:30 in the morning, which is the starting working time in that base. Okay, so you can imagine that this is at least a challenging theory, okay? And I am not an analyst, okay? I'm not military. So what I did, I show the calculation of this guy to some people, military and not military, in the US, in Israel, and in Italy. And what they told me, maybe 70% it's an error in the software. Maybe 30% is a human intervention, but take into account that only the United States has the ability to do that, okay? Another source told me that, yes, Mr. Szymanski is right, and that's all, he's right. Another source, technical source, told me that maybe who did it, the Americans, wanted to test a new technology, okay? But what struck me was the reaction of somebody who told me, I don't want to mess with this story. And I suggest you not to write about that. Suggest you to write about spacewalks, people on Mars, astronauts, and so on, but I suggest you to leave the story of the GLONASS. But it was too late. I mean, I was just writing. And I'm still alive, and I tell you a story. When I presented the book for the first time at the European Commission in Rome, at the end of the presentation, there were 2 guys coming from the American embassy. And I said, oh, guys, welcome. I thought there was somebody from the CIA. And he told me, he's from the CIA. He's from the CIA. Anyway, in 2 years and a half, I have received no complaints about that. So am I right? Am I wrong? I don't know. Just read the book. As our friend told, I tried to understand what happened before that blackout. And the date to watch very carefully is the 16 March 2004 referendum in Crimea on annexation to Russia. It was a referendum, as you know very well, not recognized by the international community for many reasons I won't stress again. And so I tried to understand what happened before this referendum, okay? So 3 days before the referendum, there was an 8-minute Russian hacking offensive against Ukraine IT infrastructure. And the day after, only 2 days later, the 15th of March, 2 Russian news agencies published the story that the Russian communication minister accused the Ukraine to try an attempt and destroy a Russian telecommunication satellite. Why? In my opinion, because most of the Russians watch TV with the dish. Okay, the territory is so wide that they don't have cables, they don't have other ways. They watch with dish.
I'm sorry, Frediano, to interrupt you. I would just ask you how much time you need, because
5 minutes.
Okay,
it's okay.
Great.
5 minutes. Okay.
Deal.
Okay. So the Russians were scared by this activity against a Russian satellite. Okay, and it made sense because it was a telecommunication satellite, and they said that a foreign intelligence agency was helping the Russians. But the most interesting thing is that the 17th of March, so the day after the referendum, the CNN publishes this story. The US Air Force has detected increased activity by Russian satellites in the vicinity of the geosynchronous belt, which hosts many US military and intelligence satellites. Officials told the CNN that they are concerned about these maneuvers, but have not yet drawn any conclusions about what the Russians might try to do. The unnamed, so the anonymous US Air Force source concludes that these maneuvers by Russian satellites are seen as potentially dangerous for US assets. So my friends, the story is that this article on CNN doesn't exist anymore, has been canceled. You cannot find on internet, even if you use those programs that take back cancelled page. I found it on ChatGPT. So this means that the story was canceled, but ChatGPT, during the daily fishing of information, has memorized this story. Okay. President Obama, that at that time was the president of the United States, was interviewed in June 2023 by Christiane Amanpour of the CNN. And she said, why didn't you reply to Russia after the annexation of Crimea? And the answer of Obama was quite tricky, because he said, in Crimea, we responded to Putin with the tools we had available at that time. Okay? So I wonder, maybe among the tools available at that time, there are also satellite activities. I don't have an answer for that, okay? So I don't want to draw any conclusion about that. But I leave you with one information. Does anybody has watched this movie? Leave the World Behind, Il Mondo Dietro di Te? What's the movie about?
What is about the end, but you don't know which one is the end. So it's everyone, it's like a family that goes to
Seaside.
house for a weekend. Then some things happen, like use of a gamma weapon, or maybe a micro radiation weapon, or the fact that many planes suddenly collapse from the sky, so that's why maybe GPS done.
Okay. So basically, this movie with Julia Roberts is the story of what would happen if the GPS goes down. Okay, planes that crashes, ships that lost the track, Teslas that switch on suddenly and crashes, no telecommunication. Okay. So the fact is that the producer of this movie were Barack and Michelle Obama. And Barack Obama contributed personally to the screenplay of this movie. And some newspapers in the US saw this movie like a warning of Barack Obama on GPS technology. So I don't have an answer for that. Maybe it's a coincidence, maybe it is not.
So thank you, Frediano, for your but still interesting presentation. I think that everybody liked the contents, and I give immediately the floor to Professor Zini for breaking the ice. We will plan still an half an hour of work. I am Leto. Yeah, and also for questions by the public, we will gather and we will give the floor to our speakers once for answer to all the questions. So prepare your questions in the while Francesco is talking. Please, Francesco.
Thank you very much. And I try to speak in English, but I want to understand you. Why is better that I speak in Italian? Why? There is a big question in this book and in the paper of Aoki professor, because we have to understand if we are at war. Are we at war in this moment? This is the problem. And if we are in the war, that's happened today is very dangerous. Because someone listen us, someone listen the data and the paper that Professor Aoki present to us, and it's very dangerous that our enemies know what we know. It's very dangerous if we are at war. This is a big problem. Is a philosopher. I am a philosopher. Is a big question for the philosophy of war. And I would to put a question to Frediano Finucci, and I want to speak in Italian. Perché ti faccio questa domanda, Frediano? E perché faccio anche una provocazione? Perché se noi siamo in guerra, if we are at war, ogni informazione che noi diamo al nostro ipotetico nemico è molto pericolosa. Molto probabilmente dobbiamo entrare in un'ottica che qui oggi qualcuno ci ha ascoltato, ripeto in italiano per quelli che non hanno, e probabilmente qualcuno di voi magari è un informatore o è una persona che riporta quello che noi abbiamo detto o i dati che la professoressa Aoki ha presentato, di cui alcuni potrebbero essere dati riservati, perché quello che lei ha presentato è quello che noi sappiamo allo stato degli atti, e che noi sappiamo quello che lei ci ha presentato è un problema dal punto di vista della sicurezza. E questo come dire, è una domanda che appunto rifaccio a Finucci, perché è un tema molto forte. The war is blood. 200,000 people are died in Ukraine. As young people as you were killed and were died. It's not a joke, the war. In the war, you die. You probably, there is someone that wants to kill you. Also for us, each one. It's very seriously. It's not a scoop, a journalist scoop. It's not a conference at university. The war is a hard question, the first hard question, because you can lose your life. Allora, questo è il punto su cui io, diciamo, faccio la mia prima provocazione filosofica, ma lo faccio anche al sistema dei media, per esempio. Perché se veramente noi siamo in guerra, prendiamo sul serio il fatto di essere in guerra, cioè in pericolo, e con qualcuno che ci ha dichiarato guerra, va bene? È il sottofondo un po' della space war che noi abbiamo studiato grazie a questa operazione, no? Verità, fatta da questo bellissimo libro di Frediano Finucci. Dobbiamo stare molto attenti, pay attention a quello che diciamo, a quello che facciamo. Nel senso che potrebbe diventare pericoloso dire ciò che noi sappiamo. Fa parte della nostra strategia a quel punto. E dobbiamo essere previdenti, cioè prevedere e essere, come ci dice Nick Bostrom in questo bellissimo libro, Super Intelligence, questo bestseller che ormai ci ha un po' svelato chi è Nick Bostrom, e lui ci dice però una cosa interessante: o siamo super intelligenti o qualcuno sarà più intelligente di noi. Lui parlava dell'intelligenza artificiale, ma poi abbiamo capito che non era l'intelligenza artificiale, è qualcun altro che gioca con l'intelligenza artificiale, no? E che sa benissimo che chi governa l'intelligenza artificiale governa il mondo, e lo ha anche detto a tutti, per cui sappiamo benissimo di chi si tratta. Allora, quello che vi voglio dire è che la questione è molto seria, e questo libro veramente è prezioso perché ci aiuta ad entrare in una questione molto, molto seria. La guerra la guerra, il dominio dello spazio. C'è un bellissimo libro scritto da un collega che si chiama Filippo Ruschi, che insegna all'Università di Firenze, in cui ci spiega la guerra aerea nella prima guerra mondiale. No? È un libro importante, anche questo ve lo segnalo, è un tomo un po' faticoso, ma ci spiega come nasce la questione del dominio aereo, no? Del dominio del potere spaziale, no? Quello che appunto chiama l'ordine spaziale. Ed è una questione molto seria, cioè veramente chi vince la partita nello spazio vince anche la partita sulla Terra. Quindi è evidente come ci sia una questione in quello che ci è stato detto, appunto, molto molto delicata. Forse è l'argomento più delicato che noi abbiamo, molto più delle armi terrestri, molto più come dire, di quello che siamo abituati a pensare nella guerra, negli armamenti tradizionali. Quindi da questo punto di vista ritorno alla domanda iniziale. Perché io ho scritto un piccolo libro durante la pandemia, si chiamava Biopolitica dell'emergenza pandemica. E mi chiedevo, a chi è giovato il dibattito, la destrutturazione di quelle che sono state appunto le fake news del fenomeno, del movimento biopolitico Novax e No Green Pass, che c'è stato in Italia ma c'è stato in tutto il mondo. A chi è servito creare il caos? Chi ha guadagnato da quello che noi chiamiamo, ed è un paradigma per noi irrinunciabile, libertà di pensiero, libertà di affermazione, libertà di andare in televisione, di essere invitato e di dire la propria, qualunque sia, la propria opinione, e di avere lo stesso spazio, gli stessi 5 minuti dell'esperto, dello scienziato, di colui che ha passato la vita a fare appunto i calcoli, i numeri. Ecco, questo è un po' il nostro limite, lo dico, Lo dico nel senso a noi qua al tavolo, ma lo dico anche a voi. C'è il rischio di fare il gioco del nemico, molto facile. Cioè c'è il rischio di dare la parola e di aver dato la parola per tanti anni, forse anche ancora oggi, a persone che approfittano del nostro liberalismo, tra virgolette, del fatto che noi teniamo al fatto che chiunque possa dire, e che usino questo nostro paradigma, a cui non vogliamo rinunciare, perché è la nostra cifra della nostra società liberale, per poi approfittare, entrare nelle televisioni, entrare nel dibattito e magari accedere a delle informazioni. Magari gli diamo pure un gettone quando parlano, quindi finanziamo anche, tra virgolette, direttamente o indirettamente. Questa è un po' la questione di fondo, e chiudo, che così apriamo alle domande. Se questo libro, va bene, che è un libro veramente, come dire, importante, no? Perché colma un vuoto, tra virgolette, come tutti quei libri che colmano un vuoto sono importanti. E ci racconta come è quello che è vero, cioè nel momento in cui noi accendiamo la mattina, facciamo lo switch on non è che ci connettiamo con i nostri amici, è uno switch on con tutti quelli che ci ascoltano, no? Compreso adesso, in questo momento. E la stessa cosa però possiamo dire dello switch off, nel momento in cui spengiamo, riconquistiamo un po' la nostra libertà di espressione, non c'è più nessuno che ci ascolta, magari, probabilmente, quindi è molto interessante. Io, come dire, userei questa come anche una strategia, l'essere capaci di governare anche senza essere online. Secondo me la partita si vince anche offline, quindi come dire, il libro va colto come in qualche modo un invito a come dire, sviluppare una strategia imprevedibile per chi in qualche modo vuole creare una difficoltà, un panico. E rimando, ecco, my question is this. For you, also for us. Are we at war? Are we at war in this moment
Would you? Thank you, Francesco, for breaking the ice. And now the floor is open for very rapid questions. You may come here and take the microphone. Are you? Ah, no, sorry. Are you leaving? Okay, bye. Thank you for coming. Or, please, if you come here and talk at the microphone for the goodness of people who is
No,
connected. Thank you all.
So for what the professor said, in fact, I agree that there is currently a war of information for sure, because I currently have been working less than a year about disinformation of Russian propaganda in Europe. So for the question, who is actually benefiting from this kind of action? It's good to look at what parties in Europe are actually have any kind of financial contact with Russia. And you can see really clearly that these parties, for example, really try, we can think if they try voluntarily or less, but they really try and really like to put this chaos in Europe specifically, because this is the area at least that I know better. So for sure there are people benefiting from the kind of chaos that was here during the pandemic and until now about Ukraine, for example. While my question for all the panel would be, and I think it's one of the most relevant topics right now, what if it's good or bad for security as we know it, the intervention and the uprising of private actors, as we saw with Musk, etc. So is it a new direction? Is it just one thing happening that will never happen again? So yeah, that's the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Oli. And other questions? Please come. And I'm sorry, I don't know your name, so if you may say it.
I'm called Philippe, and I wanted to ask a question about a theme that Professor Oki and in the presentation of Finucci was behind the lines, and it was the question about the debris. Because as Professor Oki remember, we are having an increasing number of satellites, a launch of satellites on the orbit around the Earth, and as Professor the journalist Finucci have shown us in the presentation, the Russian, just 6 months before the beginning of the war, shut down a satellite, destroyed one of their old satellites around the orbit and created something like 300 debris, 3,000 debris around on the orbit around the Earth. And I remember at the time there was a discussion about it, because the debris can create a domino effect, a cascadian effect, creating, destroying more satellite, but at the same time can create even more debris and can create a real danger about any kind of space travel anywhere, or even sending more satellites. So it can possibly shut down the possibility to create satellite around the Earth. So I don't know the actual number of how much this is possible. I just read it about it years ago, and I wondered, I don't know if you know, if there is some numbers about it, if someone has any idea, if you read anything about it. So it's just a question that I had looking at your presentations. I don't know if you have any answer about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. Other question? No? Okay, sure. Okay, so I give
a quick remark before leaving the question to my friend. A quick answer from my side.
Yeah, please.
Okay,
sure.
The first one is about the private sector. This is not something new. That's what, if I'm not wrong, Obama decided after the space shuttle program was retired. Okay, they decided to use private companies to go into space and so on. So it's not the fault of Biden or Trump. The decision was made by Obama to save money. And to my knowledge, what Musk can do as a private actor is something that single states or even a group of states, like, for example, ESA, European Space Agency states, cannot do. I would use a Latin sentence, legibus solutus. You can do what he wants, okay? Even break the law, because what's important is the goal, okay, from one side. Concerning the debris, in my opinion, creating debris is very dangerous, because it is dangerous for the enemies, but it is dangerous also for your own satellites, and moreover for the satellites of your allies. Okay, so the Russians can create debris to disturb Starlink, but if they disturb a Chinese satellite, maybe Beijing is not very happy. Okay, and considering what we can do, there are two ways, as far as I know. The first way is to fine all those companies that create debris, for example, during when they send satellites, okay, when the rockets open. And the other option is to refuel satellite, as she told us, because the longer is the life of the satellite, okay, just like gas station, okay, satellite gas station that refuel other satellites in order to increase their life. That's another way.
You, so the floor to Professor Aoki.
Oh,
sorry, Philip. Come here, please, Philip.
So I think that he was like thinking about one of solutions of the Fermi paradox, because I think that's one of the reason we find companies that do debris in space, is the reason that maybe one day there's a point in which a species on a planet cannot escape Earth or its own planet because debris are too much, so they cannot effectively go out in outer space. And that's one of the solutions to the Fermi paradox, which is the prisoner's dilemma, I think, because it's like a prisoners of our debris in space. And then to add something to the like civil and military cooperation or the actors in space, I do think we are in a form like of a permanent war, because since like maybe 2 decades, maybe 3 decades, so since there was a mix between actors, which are the states or the countries or the military or the big corporations, mixed with smaller actors. As you said, OSINT is like a viable option for intelligence, so you can do effectively intelligence by not being one of the members of the Five Eyes. You can do a lot. And that's like one of the reasons why the line between combatants and non-combatants is blurred, to the point that we are people which, like, you can shape our perception of reality to the point in which a news might be a news, but it also can be a fake news or a disinformation campaign or a shaping of the mentality of perception of reality. So maybe we can think about being in a war, but maybe we are not in a war because someone is shaping our perception of reality to make us think that we are in a state of war. So for example, if you can translate this to the current state of Europe, you can say that maybe we are in a permanent state of war with Russia. But if you look at or think about the solution, or maybe who can enjoy the most from a permanent state of war of Russia, you can reply and say maybe the biggest companies in the military sector, on the defense sector, or security sector, they can do a lot of money about this. So maybe that's a one, like a quarter of the people that can enjoy the moment of permanent war. But on the other side, you have people that they are maybe trying to understand if they are in war or not in war, but maybe their perception of reality is shaped in a fear or a state of fear, because they just live in a world in which information is shaped by some people which owns a lot of the things that makes our countries and biggest corporation work. As you said, the GPS is a good system. I do use it a lot for Intel analyst jobs, and that's why. Maxar is a viable option. And I think that maybe, for example, you can use the perception of reality of Chinese citizens to shape them into thinking their whole government is like, how you can say it? For maybe you can say, I'm a Chinese citizen. My country is like mimicking or make me think that I'm okay with COVID. But then the United States on my Weibo social networks drops my Maxar Technologies pictures in which I see that maybe my grandmother died of COVID. And then I can think and say, oh, maybe I'm shaped by the enemy of my country, or maybe I'm shaped by my own country into thinking something. And that's all because of space, all the information we are surrounded, internet, and the offline vision, because every single individual has his own perception of reality, and maybe at some point, you can manipulate much to think or make someone think a thing that is not real. And that's why.
Thank you for your, it is more a comment than a question, I think. And so I'm very pleased to give the floor to Professor Aoki for the final consideration and also for the conclusion of this interesting discussion.
Yeah, thank you very
Please.
much for your
The floor is yours.
questions and the comments. And let me talk about at first about space debris. The problem of space debris, well, from the standpoint of international law, is there is no rule that, well, to protect space environment. So if it's a rule, and if, well, you cannot leave the space debris as it is, well, when you finish your mission, then, well, if it's a legal rule, then the state's behavior would be different. But today, there is not such kind of rules. Well, India and some other countries want to make it, saying Soviet Union, well, and now Russia and the United States made most of space debris in the world, and they are responsible for removing or at least radically mitigating it. But it's just, well, opinions from, well, one global south. So the good practice and the practical need to mitigate space debris is well, not legal obligation, but practical reality, which might be, well, later translated into some legally binding rules. But the reality is, for instance, well, in the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, now 104 countries are members, and it's consensus-based decision. So if one country is opposed to that, then nothing can be done. And well, rather, so non-governmental entities like international IADC, international IADC, interagency, it means space agency, interagency debris coordination committees. Well, now 12 members, 12 space agencies, and 11 space agencies and 1 international organizations, European space agencies are members, and try to mitigate from technical standpoint, technically based guidelines, and they are, well, rather diligently observed, but by space agencies. And now commercial entities, activities are, well, very vivacious, and their activities are, well, when they get a license to launch satellites, then there, for instance, in the case of United States, Federal Communications Commission gives some orders to mitigate space debris. And actually, it's fair to say that the best and the most strongest strict rules are made by FCC. So space debris in LEO has to be burned down completely in the atmosphere within well, kind of 10 years. And in IADC's rule is 25 years rule. Yet, well, a lot of satellites are launched. So it's just, well, rules are observed, but, well, it's not enough. Then active space debris activities, removal activities, well, it's still very difficult. It's not with cooperative object. Well, if one spacecraft to remove another space debris, it cannot be cooperatively working. So it has to be done with more difficult technologies. And if it's a failure, it will generate more space debris and liability issues. And legally, launching states are completely liable for that. It's a special matter, so I will cut it out. So usually states are reluctant to make such kind of rules. So from legal point of view, well, everybody is kind of reluctant, but issue is very, very important. And one other last thing, it's very difficult to distinguish a space object is debris or a useful one. Well, in his book, well, space debris, he very well exquisitely described the Russian space object. It looks like space debris, but it has spy missions. It's one thing. And also in geostationary orbit, which is very precious, as he explained, because it looks like it remains, well, stable at any one time from the Earth. Even if the mission is over, it's, well, it wants to keep place at a certain point. And if a certain country cannot launch a satellite, that point, place, well, can be leased to other countries. So while the mission is over and it's space debris, well, by definition, yet it has economic utilities. So for some countries, it's not space debris. About geostationary orbit, I know I haven't explained to you very clearly, but what I want to say is, well, it's rather difficult to distinguish functional one and, well, not functional one. Even if it's not functional from mission-wise, still economically, not economically, financially or in economic terms, it gets proceeds. So, well, today we are kind of doomed, but, well, I think you Europeans are have something to be very, very proud. Rules and frameworks and good practices about space debris and even space traffic management, the next step, are mostly made by European space communities and academic communities. And even if it's not legally binding, it's once made. Well, companies voluntarily keep, and then, well, it will be more solid rules. Already, space debris mitigation guidelines are, well, existent, and it's joined efforts by mostly European people. And about fake news kind of things, well, I'm an international lawyer, and I kind of think if amount to intervention or interference. And if it's an intervention, it's prohibited by international law. But otherwise, it's just a nuisance. And so, and the rules of intervention is rather too broad, and to decide if it's an intervention or not, well, there are lots of opinions, legal opinions. So today, we don't know. And also, it may be sometimes in the violation of national laws, then national law could enforce it. But again, it depends on states. So I think, but the free flow of information is very important. But as you say, it's, well, it has its own very dangerous aspects. So what we could do is, now it's a time of AI, and we've lost reality already. Simple reality, we don't have it there anymore. So what is important, I think, is value and philosophy. So not to be influenced easily by that seemingly so-called fact, I think we should go back to the history, our history, and what happened in the past, and how we overcame it. So now is a time, I think, to go back to value and history, which where you young people would construct for the future. Thank you.
Thank you to our distinguished speakers. Thank you to Professor Zini. Thank you for all of you for your questions. I learned that you are concerned about space ecology, so it will probably be a topic for New Year, beside the obvious topic of Elon Musk and the private participation and the conquer of the space. Thank you again for this exciting discussion, and have a nice evening for everyone. And who is interested could join us also remotely tomorrow for the roundtable that we have organized in partnership with the European University Institute. And you will find the information on the website of the department. Thank you again. Have a nice evening. Bye.